The application of law in the shelter-in-place order and the effect of capriciousness. Today we're going to talk about this idea of how to apply law, how law is applied, why it matters to this whole shelter-in-place policy that's going on in many parts of the world, and how, quote, being capricious is relevant. So first of all, capriciousness. Let's talk about it. Let's define it. It's arbitrary, not predictable. If somebody's capricious, you don't know what they're going to do. There's no rhyme or reason. King Nero was known to be very capricious. His whims come and go. Who knows what he'll do next? Shelter in place? What is this? Well, shelter in place has been called different names in different places. And so in Singapore, they called it the circuit breaker period. But the key point is that essential businesses are allowed to keep operating. You are only supposed to go outside for essential needs. So essential needs has been generally defined as food, this or that, right? But what is an essential business? That's the difficulty. So if you look back at laws and the concept behind laws, you'll understand that laws are inherently generalizations. We talk about generalizations as something bad. You generalize as in, this person of this skin color always does this. Not true for everybody of that skin color or that gender or that this or that, right? Like people in BMW always drive horribly. Well, some of them may, maybe most of them may, but not all of them. Obviously, if something is so general, it has to be incorrect sometimes. The law of Newton, right? He came up with 3 laws that we learned in school in physics class. They don't work in space. They don't always work. They're general, but not general enough for physics, for science. That's why we try not to use the term law anymore, because they might not be true in every single circumstance. They may be true in most circumstances, but not all of them. In the medical field, you may have heard of something called the advanced cardiac life support. It's sort of, basic life support is CPR. Advanced cardiac is a little bit more complicated, getting to shocking patients, giving different medications to try to restart their heart. But I remember when one of my friends, a cardiologist, was taking the course and said, "This is stupid. They're telling you to do the wrong thing. Look at this EKG. You shouldn't give a shock." She was right. The problem is the algorithm has to be written so it's simple. So the vast majority of people who are not cardiologists can't understand what to do. But sometimes it's wrong. Sometimes you do the wrong thing. It's not specific enough. Law also isn't about right or wrong. It isn't morality. It is actually about keeping society in peace and harmony. Like driving on the right side of the road. That's what we do in the US. Is there something wrong about driving on the left side of the road? I mean, we say it's wrong, but it's because everybody else is driving on the right side here. But it's not wrong in a sense. It's like killing somebody. It's an arbitrary decision. Think about zoning regulations. The government says that, you can't run a convenience store from your home. So, which one of the 10 commandments is this one breaking? Law is theory, and the relationship of it and reality, it and people, is called enforcement or application. And so, this shelter in place order, say in California, is very vague. Essential businesses. What is essential? And that's where the difficulties arise. You see, shelter in place is about changing people's behavior. And actually, most laws are about changing people's behavior, like smoking, right? So you want to make it illegal to smoke, but you can't really do that because people will smoke anyways. You just make it harder for them to smoke. Or the seatbelt law. I remember when I was little that there was actually no seatbelt law in California. so you didn't have to wear seatbelts, and we kids did not wear seatbelts. And then California passed a law, and we were like, oh. And we were very happy when we would drive to Arizona because they didn't have a law. So across the board, okay, unclick. The goal of the law isn't to fine people. The goal of the law is to change people's behavior. And we're talking about the coronavirus, as we now have realized it's going to be quite a long time that we're going to live with it. Behavior change is all the more important, right? You don't want people just to sort of follow the law for a day or two or even a month. You want them to follow the law for a prolonged period of time. And the way to do that is to change their behavior. The problem, though, is the same as when we're dealing with teenagers. When you're trying to deal with people who are sort of, have their own minds, they notice when you're hypocritical. Teenagers are the best at noticing when somebody's a hypocrite. When they tell you to do something and they do the opposite, or when they're sort of uneven in enforcing it. Hey, how come my brother gets to do that? You told me I can't do that. Unfair. What is fairness? Treating everybody equally? The answer for a teenager, obviously, the world isn't fair. Recently, I flew back from Singapore. On the flight, I was trying to move my seat because, there was nobody in the section behind me. So my section probably had, I don't know, 6 rows. Section behind me had maybe 10. And there were like 5 people in the section behind me. I mean, there weren't that many in the section I was in, probably like, 5 people, but I was way too close to somebody else. She was right behind me. I could feel her because, how with the touchscreen, she was tapping. And then when she coughs, I was like, I didn't want to be near her. So I wanted to move. I scoped out the section behind and asked the flight attendant, hey, I want to move seats. And she said, oh, wait, we're waiting till everybody boards. It's like, I don't think there's anybody else coming. But I was patient. I waited. And then later, the purser comes by. She's the one in charge. She says, no, I'm sorry, you can't move because we're trying to do contact tracing. As in, we want to know what seat you're sitting in. So if there is somebody who's later tested positive, we could track it. But contact tracing doesn't actually help me. It doesn't prevent me or reduce the risk of me getting the virus. I didn't tell this to the flight attendant because their job is just to enforce the rules. They don't make it. But what if it doesn't make sense? If you think about it, did you ever wonder why you couldn't recline your seat when you're sitting in the last row on an airplane? They say it's for safety reasons, but there's nobody behind you. They're not going to be blocked by your reclined seat. What if you're the only one there? It's not going to matter to anybody else. I'll recline all of them. Actually, on the plane, I did recline all the seats. And they told me, because we're landing, I need to put them back up. Why does it matter? There's nobody behind me. There's nobody in front of me. There's nobody next to me. Right? It's not slower getting out because my seat's reclined. It doesn't matter. But what if somebody else sees it? Say on a normal plane when it's full. And they're like, hey, how come he could recline his seat and I can't? And then do you try to explain, well, there's nobody in back of him? When do you try to use logic? When do you just enforce everything equally? What happens to exceptions? What happens to people who break the rules? We've heard about a lot of these things, right? And we think people are unnecessarily harsh. Police body slam somebody for not wearing a mask. Somebody was jailed for, opening up her hair salon. Tesla says, this is stupid. I'm just going to start my factory going. And they actually kept the factory going even when they were told to shut it down. Should a law be enforced equally? When do you make exceptions? I think it's different in this situation because we're trying to change mindsets. We're not just trying to change behavior. Behavior change is wonderful. Yes, it is. But if you really want to change somebody's long-term behavior, I think force and threatening and punishment doesn't work quite so well. You could change it for a little bit, but they get sick of it and they just sort of rebel, and we've seen a lot of that happening. If we're supposed to have a modified form of shelter in place for years still, then we need people to buy in. We need to change the way they think. So a kid could behave himself because Santa Claus is watching, but only if you tell him in November or December. If you tell him in February, oh, it's just way too far away, he can't do that, right? So I think that one thing is maybe we should just allow more exceptions. As we've all said, these are unprecedented times, right? In unprecedented times, do we change laws in unprecedented ways? Do we say evaluate everything on a case by case basis? Because many things actually don't make sense. And when you just sort of brew on the fact that things don't make sense day after day, week after week, month after month, I think you end up not being able to handle it. So there's like small cities or villages, they're under the same law as the big cities of shelter in place. And when it really doesn't matter in your tiny town of a few thousand people and you have no cases. Or restaurants, are they all the same? Some of them are packed in there, right? Yeah, some of them you're sitting at the bar and there's basically only bars or long tables, shoulder to shoulder. Some of them have outdoor seating. You could say, okay, well, you're allowed to sit one party per table. That's fine. People will accept that, right? I mean, it's just logical, the fact that people are not all the same and they shouldn't be treated all the same. Like, we have the speed limit because we say it's unsafe, but I'm pretty sure that it's safer for the race car driver driving at 90 miles per hour than me driving even at 60 miles per hour. His reaction time is just so much better. He could handle the speed so much better. And the old lady driving at 60, that's just unsafe. She has no reaction time. I would say she shouldn't be on the road at all. But the speed limit is the same for everybody. Sometimes they change it for trucks, right? But the idea is that all this stuff is very arbitrary. And I wonder if with unprecedented times, we'll change this and just start making exceptions, doing stuff that makes sense. The problem is it has to come from higher up. I think at least in America, most of us don't feel right letting law enforcement judge because they're very biased. As I don't know about the majority, but at least we've seen some that have been very biased and they don't make the best judgment calls. But I think starting from higher up and saying, hey, times are different. Let's think about this. Yeah, come talk to me about your request. Maybe we'll grant an exception for you. And maybe you'll have some places open, some places not, but hopefully you'll do it in a way that makes sense. And people will see also, hey, it does make sense. Yeah. And then they'll accept it. And then they'll be able to follow it. And then we'll have modified shelter in place for months. And people won't be dying left and right. And the economy can gradually restart. Wouldn't that be a good thing? The problem is arbitrariness, capriciousness. We see that too much right now. It feels like the government picking winners and losers. Or it's like the whole idea that Tesla, because Elon Musk is a billionaire, because Tesla is big and rich, they just keep doing what they're doing because they don't care about the laws. They don't get enforced. Right? Does this make anybody feel better? Most of us aren't Tesla shareholders. Most of us don't have money. And the most of us, that's who you need to continue the shelter in place policy.